The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit into the flesh of her knees, claws that scraped her knuckles raw. Rain, thin and merciless as shattered glass, plastered her thin tunic to her skin and turned the stone courtyard into a slick, black mirror reflecting a bruised and weeping sky. Alara knelt. Her world had been reduced to this single, agonizing posture. Her head was bowed, hair like wet straw clinging to her neck and cheeks. Her task had been simple: scrub the flagstones until they shone. A fool's errand in a never-ending drizzle, but it was her task. She had almost finished, her arms aching with a deep, familiar burn, when Myra had appeared. Myra, with her warm cloak and her dry boots and her smile that was all sharp edges. She had held a bucket of fresh mud, gathered for the gardens, and with a delicate, theatrical stumble, she had emptied it across Alara's clean stones. "Clumsy," Myra had declared, her voice ringing with false sympathy that fooled no one. "Look at this mess. The Alpha will be returning today. He cannot see the courtyard in such a state. You must have been daydreaming, little Omega, not paying attention." The accusation was a lie, a casual cruelty that was as much a part of Alara's day as hunger. She had opened her mouth to protest, a tiny, hopeless sound. That was her mistake. "Insolence," Myra had hissed, the mask of sweetness falling away to reveal the familiar, ugly contempt beneath. "You dare to speak back? You will kneel. Here. You will kneel until your betters decide you have learned your place." And so she knelt. The pack members passed her by, some with pitying glances she hated more than the scorn, others with open amusement. They were a pack that prided itself on strength, and she was the emblem of their weakness, the orphan taken in out of a supposed pity that had long since curdled into resentment. Her own pack had been decimated by the gray blight years ago, leaving her alone, a stray to be kicked or ignored. 1 hour bled into the next. The cold was no longer just on her skin. It had sunk into her bones, a deep, invasive chill that made her teeth chatter. 2 hours. 3. The sky darkened from gray to the color of a deep bruise. 4 hours. Her knees were screaming, a symphony of sharp, grinding pain. Why did she endure it? What was the point? A bleak, hollow feeling opened in her chest. She was nothing. A ghost haunting the edges of other people's lives, a convenient target for their petty cruelties. It would be so easy to just fall. To let the cold take her, to let the darkness swallow the pain. No. The word was not spoken. It was a flicker, a tiny, stubborn ember glowing in the frozen cavern of her soul. It was the only thing she had left that was truly hers. They could take her warmth, her dignity, her freedom. They could not take this refusal to break. 5 hours. Her vision began to swim. The edges of the world blurred into a wash of gray and black. She focused on a single stone beneath her, tracing its cracks with her eyes, anchoring herself to its solid reality. 6 hours. A lifetime. The rain had not stopped. It was a constant, drumming reminder of her misery. She felt a presence and flinched, expecting another kick, another taunt. It was only old Gregor the cook, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and regret. He placed a wooden bowl beside her. It contained a chunk of stale bread and a lump of cheese. He did not speak. He did not have to. It was an act of kindness so rare, it felt like a brand. He gestured for her to rise. Myra's decree was forgotten, or at least overridden by the quiet authority of an elder. Alara tried to move, but her legs refused to obey. They were numb, frozen stilts of ice and agony. Gregor grunted, offering a hand. She took it, his grip surprisingly strong, and he hauled her to her feet. She swayed, the world tilting violently. Pain, sharp and electric, shot up her legs as blood rushed back into them. She bit back a cry, her knuckles white as she gripped the bowl. "There's a blizzard rolling down from the spine," Gregor muttered, his voice a low rumble. "The Alpha King's party was seen on the high pass. Our own Alpha wants the signal fires on the ridge lit. Everyone else is too busy fawning. He said to send someone. He said to send the Omega." The unspoken words hung in the frigid air between them. "Send the one no one will miss if the storm takes her." A death sentence disguised as an errand. Hope, fragile as a spider's thread, died in her chest. For a moment, with the bread in her hand, she had felt a sliver of warmth. Now, the cold returned, more profound than before. "Go on, girl," Gregor urged, his eyes full of a grim pity. "Get your cloak, move fast. Maybe you'll beat the worst of it." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She retreated to the small, damp cellar room she called her own, her legs protesting with every step. She devoured the bread and cheese, the food tasteless in her mouth but a necessary fuel. She pulled on her threadbare cloak, a garment that offered more memory than warmth, and slipped out the back gate of the compound. The path to the ridge was steep and treacherous even in good weather. Now, with the wind beginning to howl, it was a nightmare. The wind sliced like claws, tearing at her cloak and driving the icy rain into her face. The scent of pine and wet earth was thick, underscored by something else, something wild and electric, the smell of an oncoming storm. She was a fool to be out here. This was not a task, it was an execution. Her pack wanted her gone, and the mountain was their willing instrument. The thought should have terrified her, but it mostly made her feel tired, a deep, soul-weary exhaustion. The snow was soft, but the landing had twisted her left leg beneath her. A hot, searing pain radiated from her ankle, a stark contrast to the freezing snow packed around it. She tried to move, to push herself up, and a cry of pure agony escaped her lips. The bone was broken. She was sure of it. This is it, she thought, a strange sense of calm settling over her. This is how it ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper, alone in a snowdrift on a mountain that did not want her. The cold was already beginning to feel less like an enemy and more like a promise of sleep, a promise of an end to the pain. She closed her eyes, letting the swirling white of the blizzard fill her mind, but through the roar of the wind, a new scent reached her. It cut through the pine and the cold, primal and powerful. Wood smoke, blood, and something else. Something like a winter storm given form. Her eyes snapped open. Through the thick curtain of falling snow, she saw them, 2 points of light, burning with an impossible intensity. They were not yellow, not green. They were the color of molten gold. The lights moved closer. They were eyes. They belonged to a wolf, a creature of impossible size, its fur the color of shadow and silver, its shoulders as broad as a man's. It moved with a silent, predatory grace, the snow barely seeming to impede it. Fear, stark and absolute, seized her heart, squeezing the air from her lungs. She was going to be eaten. After everything, her end would be the teeth of a beast. The great wolf stopped a few feet from her, its head tilted. The golden eyes seemed to look right through her, past the rags and the dirt, into that tiny, flickering ember of defiance in her soul. It did not snarl. It did not growl. It simply watched her. Then, the air around it shimmered, like heat rising from pavement. The form of the wolf dissolved, flowing and reshaping with an unnatural fluidity. Where the beast had stood, a man now knelt. He was even larger than the wolf had been, a giant of a man clad in dark leathers and furs. Snow clung to his broad shoulders and his long, dark hair, which was braided with silver clasps. His face was harsh, all sharp angles and predatory beauty, a face carved from the mountain itself. And his eyes, they were the same. Molten gold, burning with an ancient, terrifying power. He was bleeding. A deep gash ran along his forearm, dripping crimson onto the pristine snow. He seemed to pay it no mind. His entire focus was on her. This was no ordinary man. This was a shifter, a powerful one. Legend spoke of such a man, a king who ruled the northern wastes, a being of immense age and power. The Alpha King. Alara's breath hitched. She tried to scramble backward to put distance between them, but the movement sent a fresh wave of agony through her broken ankle. A pained whimper escaped her lips. He moved then, closing the distance between them in a single fluid motion. He knelt before her in the snow, his presence so overwhelming it felt like a physical weight. He was the mountain. He was the storm. He smelled of pine and power and cold, clean air. "You are hurt," he said. His voice was not a shout, but a low, deep rumble that vibrated through the ground, through her very bones. It was the sound of thunder in a distant valley. She could only stare, her mind a whirlwind of terror and awe. What was happening? Was this a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by the cold? He reached for her, his hand large enough to engulf her entire head. It was a hand made for wielding axes and breaking shields. She flinched violently, squeezing her eyes shut, bracing for a blow that would surely end her. But the blow never came. Instead, his fingers, calloused and rough, brushed against the frozen skin of her cheek. The touch was impossibly gentle. And then the world exploded. It was not a sound. It was a feeling. A cataclysmic jolt of pure energy shot from his fingertips into her skin. A bolt of lightning that traveled down her spine and lit up every nerve ending in her body. It was not heat, and it was not cold. It was both. It was everything. A roaring inferno and a silent glacier, all at once. A scream tore from her throat, raw and primal. At the same time, a burning, searing pain erupted on her collarbone, just below the hollow of her throat. It felt as if a hot iron was being pressed into her flesh, branding her. The pain was so intense it was white, eclipsing the ache in her ankle, the cold in her bones, everything. Through the haze of agony, she saw his eyes. The molten gold flared, becoming brilliant, blinding suns. A low, possessive growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of profound, earth-shaking finality. Mine. The word was not just spoken. It was a claim, a decree. It settled over her, a weight heavier than any stone, a chain forged of fire and ice. Her vision swam, but just before the darkness claimed her, she looked down. There, on her skin, stark against the pale, cold flesh, a mark was forming. It bloomed like a frost flower, intricate silver lines spiraling into a complex, beautiful sigil. It glowed with a soft, ethereal light, a beacon in the swirling snow. The pain, the shock, the sheer impossibility of it all was too much. Her world tilted and went black. Her last sensation was of being lifted, of strong arms cradling her as if she weighed nothing, of being pulled against a chest that was as solid and unyielding as a mountainside. She awoke to the scent of wood smoke and drying herbs. The roaring of the wind was a muffled howl outside, but here there was warmth, a deep, penetrating warmth that felt alien and luxurious. Alara's eyes fluttered open. She was lying on a bed of soft furs, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. A fire crackled merrily in a small stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls of a small cabin. Her wet, ragged clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, oversized linen shirt that smelled of him, that intoxicating, terrifying scent of pine and winter storm. Panic flared in her chest. She sat up, ignoring the dull throb in her head. Her left ankle was tightly bound with clean linen strips over a poultice of herbs. The searing pain was gone, replaced by a manageable ache. He was there. He sat on a low stool by the fire, sharpening a wicked-looking knife with a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape of stone on steel was the only sound besides the fire and the wind. He did not look at her, but she knew, with an instinct she could not explain, that he was aware of her every breath. Her hand flew to her collarbone. The skin was tender, but the burning pain was gone. She pushed aside the collar of the shirt. The mark was there. It was no longer glowing, but etched into her skin in lines of faint, shimmering silver, like a tattoo made of moonlight. What had happened? What was this mark? "It is a soul bond," he said, his voice calm, measured. He still had not looked at her. "A claim. It marks you as my mate." Mate. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. It was absurd, impossible. He was the Alpha King, a being of legend. She was nothing, an Omega, worthless. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "You're mistaken. I'm no one." Now he looked at her. His golden eyes pinned her in place, and she felt her breath catch in her throat. There was no anger in them, only an ancient, unshakable certainty. "I have walked this world for 500 years, he said, his voice low and intense. "I have waited for you for every one of them. I am not mistaken." She shook her head, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. This had to be a dream, a cruel, elaborate fantasy her freezing mind had concocted before dying in the snow. I'm an Omega. My pack cast me out. I have nothing. You have me, he stated simply, as if it were the only truth that mattered in the world. He set aside the knife and stone and rose to his full, intimidating height. He crossed the small room and knelt beside the furs where she lay. He did not touch her, but his proximity was a palpable force, a field of heat and power that made the air hum. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Alara." It came out as a squeak. "Alara," he repeated, and the sound of her own name on his tongue was a strange and powerful thing. It sounded real. It sounded important. "I am Kaylin." She stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Fear and a terrifying, traitorous flicker of hope warred within her. He was looking at her as if she were precious, as if she were something to be cherished. No one had ever looked at her like that. "Rest," he commanded gently. "The storm will pass. You are safe here." He moved back to the fire, leaving her in a maelstrom of confusion. Her body, traitor that it was, felt safe. The warmth, the scent of him, the steady presence across the room, it all calmed the part of her she had not known was so frayed. But her mind screamed that it was a trap, a trick. Kindness was a weapon she did not understand. For 2 days they remained in the cabin as the blizzard raged. Kaylin tended to her ankle with a gentle efficiency that baffled her. He fed her broth and roasted meat, never demanding anything, his golden eyes watching her with a quiet, intense possessiveness that was both terrifying and comforting. She found herself speaking to him, telling him of her life in hesitant, broken pieces. He listened without judgment, his silence more comforting than any words of pity could have been. On the 3rd morning, the world was silent. The storm had passed. Sunlight, brilliant and white, streamed through the single small window, reflecting off a world buried in snow. "I will take you back," Kaylin said. Panic seized her. Back? To my pack? The thought of returning to Myra, to the endless drudgery and humiliation, was a physical pain. "For now," he said, his expression unreadable. "They will not harm you. I will not allow it." He held out his hand. "I will come for you, Alara, soon. This is a promise." She wanted to refuse, to beg him to take her with him, anywhere but there. But the habit of obedience was too deeply ingrained, and looking into his eyes, she believed him. She had no reason to, but she did. The journey back down the mountain was surreal. He shifted back into his wolf form, a magnificent, powerful beast, and motioned for her to climb onto his back. She hesitated, then did as he bid, her hands clinging to the thick, warm fur. He moved through the deep snow with effortless grace, and the journey that had taken her hours of struggle took less than 1. He stopped at the edge of the woods overlooking her pack's compound. She slid off his back, her feet sinking into the snow. He shifted back into his human form, his golden eyes fixed on her. "Hide the mark," he commanded softly. "Do not show it to anyone." She nodded, pulling the ragged collar of her tunic high on her neck. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek one last time. The jolt was still there, a soft hum of electricity that made her shiver. "Stay," he said again, his voice a low growl. "I will come for you." Then he turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, leaving her alone in the sudden, blinding quiet of the snow. Her return to the compound caused a stir. They had assumed her dead, a problem conveniently solved by the mountain. Myra's face, when she saw Alara limp through the gate, was a mask of disbelief that quickly hardened into fury. "You," Myra spat, cornering her by the kitchens. "How did you survive?" I found a cave, Alara mumbled, keeping her eyes on the ground. She just wanted to crawl into her cellar room and wrap herself in the memory of the cabin's warmth. Myra was not satisfied. Her eyes, sharp and cruel, raked over Alara's form. She noted the mended ankle, the strange calm in Alara's demeanor. It was not the look of a half-frozen, terrified Omega. It was something else. "What are you hiding?" Myra snarled, her suspicion a palpable thing. Alara tried to back away, but Myra was faster. She lunged, her hand grabbing the front of Alara's tunic. With a sharp tug, the worn fabric ripped. For a heart-stopping second, the silver mark on Alara's collarbone was exposed to the gray light of the courtyard. It seemed to shimmer, to pulse with a faint light of its own, as if reacting to Myra's hostile presence. Myra's eyes widened, her breath caught. She had seen depictions of such marks in the old texts. She knew the legends of the Alpha King and his centuries-long search for his fated mate. A soul bond. Her fury vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian calculation. This worthless, pathetic Omega was the Alpha King's mate? The absurdity of it was staggering. But the opportunity was immense. She released Alara, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "My apologies," she purred, her tone sickeningly sweet. "You must be tired. Go and rest." Alara scrambled away, her heart pounding with dread. She had seen the look in Myra's eyes. It was not kindness. It was the look of a hunter who had just cornered the most valuable prey in the kingdom. That night, as Alara huddled in her cellar, a secret message left the compound, carried by a rider cloaked in shadow. It was not addressed to the Alpha King. It was addressed to his greatest enemy, the leader of the Ember Covenant, a shadowy usurper who called himself the Shadow King. The message was simple. The Alpha King's weakness had been found. The attack came 2 nights later. It was silent and swift. Alara was asleep, dreaming of golden eyes and the scent of pine, when her door splintered inwards. Before she could scream, a heavy cloth was shoved over her face, its scent acrid and sweet. Her limbs grew heavy, her thoughts dissolving into fog. Shadowy figures lifted her from her cot. She caught a glimpse of their dark robes, the symbol of a black flame embroidered on their chests. The Ember Covenant. As they carried her out into the night, she felt a searing pain. Not from a weapon, but from within. It was a cold, tearing agony in her chest, a hollow void opening where the warm hum of the bond had been. They had put silver chains on her wrists and ankles. The metal was unnaturally cold, burning her skin, but its true purpose was far more sinister. It was a poison to her newfound connection. It was dampening the bond, stretching it thin, threatening to sever it completely. The distance grew with every step they took, and the pain intensified until it was a physical scream trapped in her soul. Kaelin. Her mind cried his name, a desperate, silent plea into the growing emptiness. She was taken to a dark, cold fortress carved from black rock, a jagged wound in the side of a desolate mountain. The air was stale, smelling of old stone and dark magic. She was thrown, not into a cell, but into a grand, torchlit hall. A figure emerged from the shadows. He was tall and unnervingly thin, clad in robes of black and crimson. His face was pale, his features sharp and intelligent, but his eyes were empty, like chips of obsidian. This was not a man driven by simple greed. He was a void, a being of pure, cold ambition. "The little Omega," he said, his voice a dry whisper, like leaves skittering across pavement. "I must admit, I am disappointed. I had expected the Alpha King's fated mate to be more." This was Vorlag, the Shadow King. He circled her, his obsidian eyes studying the silver mark on her collarbone, which was now dull and lifeless under the influence of the silver chains. "Do you know what that is, little one?" he asked, his voice laced with mocking pity. "It is the greatest power in this world, a bond forged by fate itself, a power Kaelin has hoarded, waiting for a vessel like you, a power I intend to take." He explained his plan with the detached air of a scholar discussing an insect. The bond was new, not yet fully settled. Using an ancient ritual amplified by the pain of separation and the power of the fortress itself, he would shatter it. The raw energy released would be funneled not into the ether, but into him. It would give him the strength to challenge Kaelin directly, to break him. "You," Vorlag finished, a thin smile touching his lips, "will be the key to my ascension, your only true purpose. And when the bond breaks, you will simply cease to be. A small, worthy sacrifice." The worthlessness she had fought against her entire life came crashing down on her. He was right. She was just a vessel, a key, a tool to be used and discarded. Kaelin had not seen her. He had seen a prophecy, a means to an end. The hope she had harbored was a foolish, childish dream. Her spirit broke. They threw her into a dungeon cell, the stone floor slick with damp. The silver chains bit into her skin, and the cold void in her chest was an all-consuming agony. Despair, absolute and profound, washed over her. She curled into a ball on the floor, the cold stone leaching what little warmth she had left. This was her fate. To die alone in the dark, her only contribution to the world being the destruction of the one person who had shown her a moment's kindness. She wept, not for herself, but for him, for the pain this would cause him. In her deepest misery, a strange clarity emerged. It did not matter if he saw her as a person or a prophecy. The connection between them was real. The safety she had felt in his arms was real. And Vorlag was going to use that to destroy him. She had to fight. But how? She was chained, powerless, her one connection to strength being systematically destroyed. She closed her eyes, shutting out the darkness of the cell. She focused on the pain in her chest, on the gaping void. Instead of recoiling from it, she reached into it. She followed the thin, frayed thread of the bond, the last vestige of warmth in a universe of cold. She poured all of her will, all of her desperation, all of that tiny, stubborn ember of defiance into one silent cry. "Kaelin." For a long moment, there was nothing. The void remained. The pain remained. Then, a flicker. A pinprick of warmth, infinitesimally small, at the very edge of her perception. It was him. The warmth grew, pushing back against the cold. A voice, not of sound, but of pure will, echoed in the deepest part of her soul. "Ilara." His presence wrapped around her, a phantom embrace against the crushing despair. The pain of the separation was still there, but now it was shared. She could feel his agony mirroring her own, his fury a roaring inferno on the other side of their connection. "Hold on," his voice commanded, a lifeline in the darkness. "I feel you. I see you. Hold on. I am coming." The promise was not a comfort, it was a war cry. It reignited the ember in her soul, fanning it from a flicker into a flame. She would not be a sacrifice. She would not be a tool. She would hold on. The ritual began at dawn. Alara was dragged from her cell and chained to a great black stone altar in the center of the main hall. The silver chains felt heavier now, burning with a vicious cold that seemed to suck the very life from her. Vorlag stood before her, his obsidian eyes gleaming with triumph. His acolytes chanted in a low, guttural language, their voices weaving a web of dark energy that made the air thick and hard to breathe. "The bond is stretched to its breaking point," Vorlag whispered, tracing the dull mark on her collarbone with a chilling finger. "Can you feel it, little one? The glorious end. The beginning of my reign." She could feel it. The thin thread connecting her to Kaelin was fraying, snapping strand by strand. The pain was unbearable, a physical tearing in her heart. But beneath the pain, she felt Kaelin's promise. "I am coming." She gritted her teeth and met Vorlag's gaze, her eyes burning with a hatred that surprised them both. Suddenly, a sound shattered the ritualistic chanting, a deep, resonant boom that shook the fortress to its foundations. It was followed by another, and then the massive northern wall of the hall exploded inward in a shower of rock and black mortar. Through the dust and chaos, a figure stood silhouetted against the gray morning light. Kaelin. He was no longer the calm, controlled man from the cabin. This was the Alpha King in his wrath. His eyes were twin novas of molten gold, his face a mask of terrible fury. In his hand, he held a massive war axe that hummed with ancient power. "Vorlag!" he roared, his voice the sound of an avalanche. Behind him, his warriors poured into the hall. The Winter Guard, clad in white fur and gleaming steel, their faces grim and resolute. They crashed into the ranks of the Ember Covenant, and the hall erupted into a maelstrom of desperate, brutal combat. Kaelin did not engage in the melee. His eyes were locked on Alara, chained to the altar. He moved toward her, a force of nature, cutting down any acolyte foolish enough to stand in his way. Vorlag stepped forward to meet him, a blade of shimmering black energy forming in his hand. "You are too late, old wolf," he hissed. "The ritual is nearly complete. When she breaks, so will you." They clashed. It was a battle of titans. Kaelin's axe, a whirlwind of silver and steel, met Vorlag's shadow blade in a shower of sparks. The air crackled with raw power. They were perfectly matched, Kaelin's primal strength against Vorlag's dark, insidious magic. Alara could only watch, helpless. The pain of the bond was reaching a crescendo. She felt it begin to tear. A scream built in her throat. Kaelin, distracted for a fraction of a second by her cry, faltered. It was all the opening Vorlag needed. The shadow blade darted forward, not at Kaelin's chest, but at his leg, a cunning, crippling blow. The cursed metal bit deep. Kaelin roared in pain and fury, stumbling back, falling to one knee. The sight of him, the mighty Alpha King, brought low. The sight of his blood, dark and rich upon the black stone, it broke something inside Alara. It was not her spirit. It was the dam that had held back a lifetime of pain, of fear, of worthlessness. All of it. The cold nights, Myra's sneers, the humiliation in the rain, the terror in the snow, the despair in the dungeon. It did not wash away. It ignited. The agony of the breaking bond was consumed by a new power, a firestorm of incandescent rage and ferocious, protective love. A light, pure and blindingly white, erupted from her. It was not a gentle glow. It was a nova. The silver chains on her wrists and ankles did not melt. They vaporized. The wave of light slammed into the chanting acolytes, and they did not burn. They simply dissolved into ash. The light washed over Kaelin, and his wound knitted itself closed, the dark magic of Vorlag's blade purged by the pure energy. Alara stood. She was no longer chained to the altar. She was the altar, the focal point of this immense power. The silver mark on her collarbone blazed with a light so intense it was painful to look at. Her eyes, once the color of a stormy sky, now glowed with the same brilliant silver light. The hall fell silent. The battle stopped. Winterguard and Covenant survivor alike stared in stunned awe. Vorlag staggered back, his hand raised to shield his eyes from the glare. The confidence and mockery were gone from his face, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. What are you?" he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. She took a step forward, then another, descending from the altar platform. Her bare feet made no sound on the stone floor. She was no longer the timid, shivering girl from the courtyard. She was a column of celestial fire, a being of terrible and beautiful power. She stopped directly between Vorlag and the still kneeling Kaelin, a living shield of light. "I am his," she said, and her voice did not tremble. It rang through the hall, clear and absolute, infused with the power that now flowed through her veins. "And he is mine." She turned her head slightly, her glowing eyes meeting Kaelin's golden gaze. The connection between them snapped back into place, no longer a thread, but a brilliant, unbreakable river of light and warmth. Then she faced Vorlag again, her expression hardening into righteous fury. "You will not touch him." Vorlag, recovering his nerve, let out a desperate, enraged snarl. He gathered the shadows to him, hurling a bolt of pure darkness at her. She did not even flinch. She simply raised a hand and a shield of white light flared into existence, swallowing the darkness without a trace. It was instinct. It was as natural to her as breathing. The power had been inside her all along, dormant, waiting for her to claim it. "You sought power," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone as she advanced on him. "You wanted to take it. But power is not taken. It is earned. It is realized." He threw another blast and another, his attacks growing wilder, more desperate. She walked through them as if they were nothing more than smoke, her light effortlessly dispelling his darkness. He was a creature of shadow, and she was the dawn. He tried to flee, to dissolve into the darkness, but she was too fast. She raised both hands and tendrils of hard light, solid as steel, shot from her fingertips. They wrapped around Vorlag, binding his arms and legs, lifting him from the ground. He struggled, but the light held him fast, burning away his shadows, leaving him exposed and powerless. She stood before him, the captured Shadow King, and looked into his terrified, obsidian eyes. She saw the void there, the empty hunger for power, and she felt not hatred, but a profound pity. He was the one who was truly worthless, for he had nothing inside him to begin with. "It is over," she declared, and with a final, decisive pulse of energy, the light contracted. Vorlag did not scream. He simply vanished, his dark energy utterly annihilated by her pure light. Silence, absolute and complete. The remaining members of the Ember Covenant dropped their weapons, falling to their knees, their faces a mixture of terror and reverence. Alara stood in the center of the hall, the light around her slowly receding, drawing back into her until only her eyes and the mark on her collarbone still shone with a soft, silver luminescence. The immense power settled within her, no longer a raging storm, but a deep, calm sea. She felt whole. For the first time in her life, she felt completely and utterly whole. Then, the adrenaline faded, and the strength left her legs. She swayed, exhausted. Before she could fall, strong arms were around her, lifting her, holding her tight. Kaelin. He buried his face in her hair, his body trembling with the aftermath of battle and a raw, overwhelming relief. "Alara," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his golden eyes searching her face. He cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I had you. I had you, and I lost you." "You found me," she whispered, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, over the steady, powerful beat of his heart. He looked at the blazing silver mark on her collarbone. Awe and a fierce, boundless love filled his eyes. "My queen," he murmured, the words both a statement and a prayer. As he spoke, a searing heat flared on his own chest, right beneath her hand. She gasped and pulled her hand back. There, burning itself onto his skin, directly over his heart, was a matching mark. A swirling, intricate sigil of gold, a perfect mirror of the silver one she bore. The bond was no longer just his claim on her. It was hers on him. It was complete, equal. "You are my strength, Alara," he said, his voice raw. "Not my weakness." He swept her up into his arms and carried her from the dark fortress, out into the clean, cold light of day. His winter guard formed a protective circle around them, their expressions no longer just loyal, but filled with a deep, profound reverence for her. He took her not to a cabin, but to a city. A breathtaking city built into the heart of a mountain, a place of soaring white towers and bridges that spanned dizzying chasms. This was the citadel, Kaelin's seat of power. He did not hide her away. He carried her directly to the throne room, a vast cavern glittering with raw crystals, where his entire court was assembled. He walked to the twin thrones of black stone and silver inlay and gently set her on her feet before them. A murmur went through the assembled lords and ladies, their eyes wide with curiosity and shock. They saw her simple, torn clothing, her bare feet, but they also saw the silver light that still lingered in her eyes and the unwavering devotion in their king's gaze. "For 5 centuries this throne has been empty," Kaelin announced, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "I waited. Our people waited. For the one foretold. The soul of our nation. The heart of our king." He turned to them, his golden eyes sweeping across the assembly. "They called her Omega. They called her worthless. They cast her out and sent her to die. They were wrong." He turned back to Alara, his gaze softening. "She survived the storm. She faced the shadow and was not consumed. She is the light bringer, the soul healer. She is my mate, my bond, my equal." He looked at the crowd once more, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "She is your queen." Then, he did something that stunned the entire court into absolute silence. Kaelin, the Alpha King, the conqueror of the North, the most powerful shifter in the known world, went down on one knee before her. He knelt on the cold stone floor, bowing his head in an act of ultimate fealty and devotion. He took her hand, the hand that had been scraped raw on the courtyard stones, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. They had made her kneel in the rain for 6 hours to teach her she was worthless. Her king now knelt for the 7th hour to show her she was priceless. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow, but of overwhelming, cathartic release. The cold, hollow place inside her was gone, filled to bursting with warmth and light, and a love so powerful it was the bedrock of the world. The silence in the hall broke. A single lord began to clap, then another. Soon the entire throne room erupted in a thunderous roar of approval, a sound of joyous, heartfelt welcome that shook the very mountain. Kalen rose, his golden eyes shining with unshed tears of his own, and guided her to the empty throne beside his. It was not cold. It felt as if it were carved from sunlight. As she sat, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was no longer a ghost. She was no longer invisible. Later, they stood on a high balcony overlooking the glittering city. The cold night air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and snow. Kalen's arms were wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her head. The warmth of his body, the steady thrum of the bond between them, was a constant, comforting presence. "Are you cold?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against her back. She smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She thought of the rain, of the snow, of the dungeon's chill. That cold felt a lifetime away, a story that had happened to someone else. "No," she whispered, leaning back against his solid strength. "I don't think I'll ever be cold again." She was home. She was loved. She was queen. And for the first time, beneath a sky full of stars, Alara felt truly, incandescently alive.